Yesterday, in the House State Affairs Committee, the House Joint Memorial 8 was up for a public hearing. And this is the memorial that we had Representative Dale Hawkins on to discuss. This addressed border security and impeaching the president for the lack of enforcing the border. And so there was a lot of testimony. We've talked about this multiple times with some folks, but yesterday, Vice President of the Idaho Freedom Foundation, Fred Birnbaum, was there, and he delivered some fantastic remarks regarding the concerns that we have in our country and in our state. And so we have his 2 minutes that we want to play, and then we'll walk through that, and then we'll invite Fred on. But let's watch Fred's testimony yesterday in the House State Affairs Committee.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Fred Birnbaum, the Idaho Freedom Foundation. I stand strongly in support of HJM 08. There's an old adage, in order to solve a problem, you have to properly define it. The reason we have an immigration invasion, as it was related by Representative Hawkins, is President Joe Biden has taken dozens of administrative actions to facilitate that invasion. Just a fact. He ended the Migration Protection Protocol, also known as Remain in Mexico. I won't restate all of those, but the purpose of this memorial is to make it a priority of Congress to remove the man who should be held accountable. The buck stops with Joe Biden, President Joe Biden. He has done these things. It's documented. It started day one. He even telegraphed it during the campaign. I'm going to open the border. He's done that. So for people to say we need targeted immigration reform, if the current president will not enforce current laws, why would passing new laws fix that? He's not enforcing current laws. He's not allowed to do what he's doing. He's twisting the law the way he has twisted the laws as it relates to student debt. He's doing that with immigration. So that's why this memorial is so important in calling for his impeachment. He is doing these things. It's a conscious decision. Secondarily, if you look at page 2 and you look at the precedence of the language, it says Congress should prioritize laws further tightening border security and immigration before funding the war in Ukraine. The problem we have in Congress, and this goes back to 1986, they haven't been able to agree. So we're going to wait. So we've waited almost 40 years for agreement, and now they're going to get it in the next 9 months. We have competing proposals. H.R. 2 would do what the agricultural folks want. So the point is, we need these two things before the third, and the third would essentially say if H.R. 2 didn't do it, then we could address perhaps other needs of labor. But if you do not properly define a problem, you will not solve it, and this president needs to be held accountable. And I see my time has expired, so I'll wrap up. And I would just say, though, we should not throw out the baby with the bathwater on those lines 40 to 42, because that's not really the thrust of this document. The thrust is what's called for in the second page. Thank you, and I'll stand for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Birnbaum.
Okay, fantastic summary there. Fred Birnbaum joins us now. Hello, Fred. Welcome to the program. You were asked several questions from the folks up there, and I want to play an exchange with Representative Gannon that you had, which I thought was fantastic. But we'll hold that for a minute or so. What was your reaction to a lot of the arguments being made against this bill yesterday, and where do you think we're headed now?
Well, Matt, first off, great to be here. I just have to let you know up front, I only have about maybe 15 minutes this morning because a lot's going on. So the bill did get sent to the floor. The opposition to the bill came primarily from three groups: the food producers, the Farm Bureau, and then the dairymen. And, you know, I respect our ag industries. I think everyone does. And I think to some extent their opposition was misplaced. And I'll speak to why that was so. On lines 40 to 42, first page of the bill, it starts with, whereas the thirst for cheap immigrant labor in Idaho has created a conduit for human trafficking and drugs and other related, like fentanyl and other related drugs. So they obviously didn't like thirst for cheap immigrant labor. And so some of the conversation got sidetracked by those lines. And my overarching argument was, well, maybe that's not the best choice of language from the perspective of a dairyman or big ag, but where we concluded in the bill with the three asks, which I have this right here, or I should say the memorial, with the impeachment of Biden and the passage of H.R. 2, that's the important part of this. The exchange with Gannon, I want to get to separately a little later, and I'll tell you why. And I do want to emphasize for your listeners something that's very important, and that is there is a competing memorial, Senate Joint Memorial 102, and all it calls for is targeted immigration reform. And people need to understand everybody's been asking that for decades. We've all heard it. And what it allows effectively is the impasse, the stalemate in Congress. And while the stalemate takes place, millions of people come in, right? So we can't agree, therefore just let millions in. Well, who's letting the millions in? Joe Biden is. And he has taken as many executive actions as possible, and as I mentioned in my testimony, to facilitate the invasion. People act like this is some sort of accident or maybe maladministration. It is not. It's a conscious policy decision to essentially replace the historic American nation with as many people from the third world as possible. Some people don't want to say that. It's a factually correct statement.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. I mean, there's no denying when we look at it that these are conscious decisions to facilitate this invasion for whatever purposes, whatever, and there are many folks coming across that have many different reasons for coming across. If you're talking about bad actors here. So yeah, so this is an extremely important memorial. And when you look at, and I think I maybe have asked you this last time, would you be comfortable if both memorials passed, or is there really something inherently bad with the Senate version?
Great question. And it's important for your listeners to understand the distinction. So as I mentioned briefly earlier and in my testimony, the Senate version has all these nice whereas clauses and actually say some of the same things that this House version. But the Senate memorial concludes with the twice repeated ask, targeted immigration reform. And the problem with that is that isn't going to happen in the short term because the Senate and the House aren't on the same page, and the Republicans and the Democrats aren't on the same page, and the Biden administration certainly isn't. And we saw that with the collapse of what I would call the Senator Langford negotiated border deal, which was wrapped into the package of Ukraine and Israel aid. And actually, when Representative Gannon asked me that question, he got it wrong. And I didn't respond by trying to correct him because there were two bills that came very quickly, but I do want to speak to that. So what happened was Senator Langford was told by Mitch McConnell, the majority leader, go negotiate with the Democrats some sort of border deal where we can graft that onto the Ukraine aid package, the 90 billion plus. And he came back with that. And of course, it was terrible. And even the Farm Bureau acknowledged that yesterday, by the way. It would still allow thousands of people to come in a day until, drastic actions were facilitated. So in other words, all it would do is reduce a flood to a torrent. So instead of having a flood, we just have a torrent. And of course, what happened was McConnell read the tea leaves and the Senate killed it. And maybe McConnell, being the crafty man that he was, realized, well, they'll kill it. And the next night, they had that late night debate and they sent to the House a Ukraine, Israel, Taiwan package that had no border deal. And they happened right after. And I think Representative Gannon got it wrong, and I'm not faulting him. So my response, I said it was a fig leaf border deal with the Ukraine aid package. But the reality is it never actually made it out of the Senate. But had it, it would have been a bad deal. That's why the Republican conservatives in the Senate, such as there are, said no deal. Right. And they backed away and it collapsed. So I think that further anchors the point that if the Republicans want a deal, the Democrats are only going to give them a bad one.
Yeah. Well, let's play that clip real quick. That exchange with you and Gannon real quick.
Sure.
You got
Gannon.
that queued up, guys?
Thank you, Mr.
Yeah, here we go.
Chairman and Mr. Birnbaum, and we miss you. We haven't seen you here lately, but I wonder if you're open to amending this resolution to include a call for removal of the Speaker of the House as Speaker of the House because he refuses to hear a bipartisan bill that passed the Senate with more than a 60-vote margin. He's put the bill in his drawer. He's obstructed the legislative process. And by doing so, we have no resolution, no solution, and no democracy in the United States Congress. Would you be interested in including that in your resolution?
Well, I think, Representative Gannon, that probably should be directed at the bill's sponsor. So do you want to hold that question for the bill sponsor? Bill sponsor, you might be prepared to answer that, okay?
Could I comment briefly
You're
on
welcome
that?
to comment on that.
Just on the Mr. Chairman and Representative Gannon, I think there are a couple inaccuracies in that. So yes, the Langford Compromise with the Ukraine money did pass the Senate. However, H.R. 2 passed the House. So you could just as equally say that we should impeach Charles Schumer, Senator Schumer from New York, for not even taking up H.R. 2. And as the gentleman from the Farm Bureau acknowledged, they don't support the Langford Compromise simply because it still lets, instead of maybe 3 million streaming in a year, it'll be 1.5 million. So it's not actually doing anything. It was basically designed to get money to Ukraine and Israel and support Taiwan with a fig leaf of border security. So we'll call it the fig leaf compromise. And I don't think you should impeach the speaker for opposing the fig leaf compromise.
Excellent. Yeah, there it was, the fig leaf compromise. Let's hope that permeates throughout the nation there, Fred. Great points there, and it begs the question, what is everybody paying attention to? How do they decipher these things? And they're not being very genuine when they're just picking and choosing their battles here and their arguments.
So, and I have to state this at the outset, when I acknowledged it passed the Senate, it actually what passed the Senate was the bill that was right behind the Langford Compromise. So that failed. And then the bill that Johnson's holding is the Ukraine aid bill, stripped of any border language. So it was one of these things where maybe McConnell was being clever. Maybe that's why he doesn't have his job anymore or stepped down, where he put something forth that was unpalatable and said, okay, the Senate can't do this bad border bill with Ukraine. It fails. So we're just going to give Ukraine and Israel $90 billion and just call it good. And of course, that bill did pass. And that's the one that the speaker doesn't want to pass because he knows, and here is the tie back in, if that passes, Biden won't care about the border. He'll have the money for Ukraine. So the border was the leverage. And the Democrats used the leverage better because they did a lousy border deal with the $90 billion, and McConnell said it's great. Then he realized it wasn't, so he let it fail, and he actually at the end, I guess, flipped against it. I don't know if he voted against it, but he allowed it to fail in the Senate. So this goes back to the overarching point. This Congress. So people say, "Well, get it done, get a deal done, target immigration reform." You have to, that sort of presupposes that the Democrats and the Republicans want the same things. We don't. Biden wants the country flooded with the third world to change the demographic makeup. That actually it goes back decades. In the 2016 Democratic presidential debate, most of the candidates for president, this is before, obviously Hillary won in 2016, or I'm sorry, yeah, she won the nomination. She lost the election. But the debate, the candidates on the stage, most of them didn't even believe in a border. I'm going back a number of years. And Biden, when he got elected in 2020, as he was campaigning, signaled, that. And then he made these false claims that, well, this is our system and how it works. Well, no law has changed since Biden relative to immigration was elected since Trump. What he's done is he's used executive action like he tried to do with the student loan forgiveness. And he basically has twisted the law, knowing that Congress doesn't seem to have the will to impeach him. Congress, the Democratic Congress, impeached Donald Trump over one phone call to Ukraine. but the Republicans don't seem to be able to impeach Joe Biden over willfully ignoring the immigration law. And the way he's done that, I know I'm going into a lot of detail, but the current law says if you want to be an asylee, and there are other reasons you can get into the country, you have to, one of three things. The U.S. government will detain you until the time of your hearing, and we don't have enough beds. And Biden knows that, especially when he says, come one, come all. Or people can be selectively released if there's a high probability, that their case is valid and they'll return. Third, and this was the brilliance of the Trump administration, they can be required to remain in a third country, to remain in Mexico. Well, the Mexican government wasn't going to let 8 million or 7 million people camp out there, right? Passing them through was fine because that gives the cartels all this money to sort of become the gatekeeper for these people. So Trump had negotiated the Migration Protection Protocol, remain in Mexico. One of the first things Biden did was say, it's over. We're terminating that. And that was probably the biggest one. So that's why HJM 8 is much more effective than the other one. The other one is targeted immigration reform. That's SJM 102. This starts by saying, I'm going to read the language for your listeners. The number one point, United States House of Representatives should impeach President Biden for the high crime of willfully failing to enforce existing immigration law and sanctioning invasion of the United States by millions of military-aged men.
Yeah.
And then
there it is.
Yeah. Now, therefore, be it resolved. I'll just read the end of this. The Idaho legislature requests and calls upon the Senate and the House of Representatives of the United States Congress to take action with all deliberate speed to adopt and implement actions against the Biden administration's lawlessness and treason, consistent with the action items set forth in this joint memorial.
Yeah.
That's what's got the establishment aflutter. They, treason, impeach. But that is why this memorial is important. Will it actually do anything? No. But just think if Idaho, as a red state with an 80% Republican legislature, sent SJM 102 to Congress, it would be another squid flapping its tentacles. We're a squid, we're flapping our tentacles, target immigration reform. No, this is the president is treasonous, he's sanctioned invasion, impeach him. And if they ignore it, fine. The legislature, which represents the people of Idaho, is on record calling the president of the United States conduct treasonous.
Right.
Invasion.
I hear the number 7 million people just since he's been in office, President Biden. 7 million. That's 3 Idahos fold, at least. Right. That's incredible.
And we don't even know because the Border Patrol's data seems to be lagging.
Right.
And they track what they call the contacts they make, and then how many are led through this way. And then they have a thing called gotaways, the people that they don't actually process.
Sure.
So we really don't even know. It's in the millions. Who knows? Yeah. But I think if you add it all up, it's probably somewhere around 7 or 8 million. We don't even know because the people who are really dangerous aren't coming and asking, at the port of entry for, they might be on some list. They're going over the mountain pass at 3 a.m. with the backpack.
Right.
And they know the Border Patrol is busy processing the flood of people showing up at Del Rio.
Yeah, it's incredible. All right. Well, Fred, thank you so much for staying on top of this and bringing such clear, concise, sanity to this argument. That's what they need down there. So it's good to see you down there. Fred Birnbaum, thank you again. We'll have you back.
Thank you very much, Matt. It's great to be here.
All right. Take care. All right, folks, we will take a quick break and we will be back real quick.